You joined me in the middle of trying to troubleshoot something, and I've made the realization that this is probably going to make an interesting video, so I should probably stop what I was doing and set up the camera, which I have. So let's talk about what's going on. I have purchased a very used lightsaber hilt from Galaxy's Edge. This is a Princess Leia hilt. It's missing the display adapter top. It's just got this emitter, which is the functional one, which that's good. I want the electronics, not the display of it. If you look closely, there are things that are missing. There should be something that goes here. That's gone. And here, there's a little decorative piece here that should be there, and that's gone. Now, I found this off of eBay, and all I could get from the seller is that this was a retired hilt from Disneyland. And the best explanation I've been able to get from other people that I've talked to is that this is likely a hilt that was used for demonstration purposes in either docks or downtown Disney. So anybody who wanted to buy a Leia hilt could use one that they had on display to wave it around, see what it was like, and, apparently throw it against the wall several dozen times because, this thing is just a mess. And then once these hilts have become so degraded, they package them back up in the box they came in, and they get sold at a cast member only or cast member exclusive shop. That's likely where this comes from. Anyways, so I got it, I received it, and the first thing I wanted to do is figure out, does it work? And I didn't even bother trying to insert a blade. I just grabbed the battery pack. So I grabbed my multimeter. In this case, there's your battery voltage. It's those two pins there. And then the speaker, which I can set this to ohms and go across the other two, and it's either going to be 8 or 16, and in this case it's 16 or roughly 16 ohms. So that's the speaker, those two connectors there, and that's the power. The battery pack is fine. I put the battery pack in. These screw together like so. Now that's all set together. We've got a good battery pack. Let me grab a blade. So it detects that the blade has been inserted, and I can now come here and ignite it. The blade doesn't ignite. It detects that the blade is there, it just doesn't ignite. And I've seen this before. In fact, I've done a video about this before, just with a Savvy's hilt instead of a Legacy hilt. So where's the problem, and what can we do to figure it out? Well, let's start with here. This is the base of the hilt. All the electronics are in here, in this section. So the first thing I want to do is check the rings here to see if I've got any kind of connection. And I can, again, go back to my multimeter here, and I find that the middle is positive and the outer is ground, and my multimeter sees 4.7 volts. And then if I come to the middle line, which is the data line, I also see 4.5-ish volts. Future me here. I'm about to try and explain how a hilt detects that a blade has been inserted and get it completely wrong, so I'm going to redo it. For all lightsabers from Galaxy's Edge, the way it detects that a blade has been inserted is it starts by pulling the data line to ground. So if I take my multimeter here, which is in voltage, and I measure from the positive rail to the data line, I get a voltage because the data line is connected to ground. When you insert a blade, it takes power from the power rail and sends it out over the data line. And the microcontroller in here will suddenly see power on the data line. That is how it knows that a blade has been inserted. The important takeaway is that if I measure voltage across power and the data line and I see some voltage there, then I know I've got a good power connection and I've got a good data connection. Back to figuring out why this hilt isn't working and hopefully to fix it. So now I've got these pinned out, and I understand what goes where now for this, and I know that it's good because it's detecting the blade is being inserted. I've got a good ground, I've got a good power, and I've got a good data. So this is all good. So then the problem might be in here. So here's how I decided to try and figure that out. I'm going to screw this back in. I'm going to take this. This is a little adapter I made that lets me get access through these wires to the ground data and power lines that are inside the connector here. I'm going to grab power, and I'm going to grab ground, and it's on voltage, so I should see 4 volts or thereabouts, 4.5 volts, and I see nothing. Well, now what if I grab the data line? I see the 4.5 volts that we saw down at the connector with those 3 rings earlier. So the data line is probably good. The power line is probably good, but it looks like the ground line is broken. And once I figured that out, I said, this might make an interesting video. And that is where I am at right now. So the question becomes, how do I get in to this hilt? Do we see any screws? And I do see screws. I see these little, looks like hex bits right there, and they go all the way around. They just hold the blade socket in place, I think. The screws that you're going to see way down in the bottom of the socket there do not come out. Well, they do, obviously, but those are not at all what I want to remove to get access to the electronics yet. I will eventually, because it's almost certain the wire that connects to the PCB that's on the underside of those pogo pins in the socket there, what's broken. That's where the break was for the Savvy's hilt that I had a problem with. It's just, how do I get in there? You know what? It might be those screws after all. All right. Thing loose now from that? Certainly doesn't feel like it. It feels like those screws were just decorative. Alright, so riddle me this. Why does that have a notch there? Why does that notch exist? Is that notch there so you can screw it in and take it out? I'm going to have to look around and try and figure out what's up, and I'll come back. Okay, desperate times call for desperate measures. I've spent probably 24 hours trying to figure out how this thing was put together and thus how to remove it. And the only thing I can come up with that makes any sense, well, 2 things. My first thought was that the set screws and whatever went here, or like another set screw, were what held the core in place. But the core doesn't want to come out in either direction. Looking from the top end here, I can see that you see that little strip of exposed metal there? Right below that is plastic. It's all part of the plastic socket here. And it goes underneath the metal. So like there's a cap here. And if I look on the sides here, it almost looks like there are seams here. Like maybe one of these rings, like this one right here. Maybe these top 2 come off. And maybe that's what the set screw is going into, because it's metal on the other side, not plastic. And the metal that's on the other side, I tried to do a resistance measurement, and it's less resistance to the top than it is to, any exposed metal down here. But there's also coatings and whatnot, so I don't know if how valuable that test was. But in any event, that's my best guess, is that these top 2 rings here are part of a metal cap, and this pops off, and when you pull that off, the socket will come out, but it's glued or epoxied or something in place, and it's not coming out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the top off, and I'm almost done. What I'm doing is I'm just taking a saw and chopping away at a seam right here, just sawing slowly, a little bit at a time, the aluminum that this, or whatever it is that it's made out of. A little bit at a time, using my vise here, and then vacuuming up the little bits of metal that fall off. And I had a jeweler's saw, but the blade broke, and I don't have any spare blades, or I can't find them. So I've been using this mostly, and this is some kind of X-Acto saw, and I don't even know if it's made to cut metal, but it seems to be working. So as I've been cutting to the point where I can start to see the black plastic core. You can sort of see right there in the middle there's like a hole. And so I've just been going around creating a bunch of those little holes, leaving a little bit of metal in between each hole, so that way I can now come back through, and hopefully with a few slices of the saw, cut the rest of it off, down to the through all the metal around the corner, around the circumference here, that's the word. And then I can just pop this top off, and I'm hoping that when I do that, first I'm hoping it comes off at all. I'm hoping that when that comes off, that will allow me to pull the electronics out as well. And then if I can repair the electronics, maybe I can JB weld or something, that seam, so, I can put this back together. Because, it's in a terrible condition to begin with, so I'm not worried about breaking it. I'm also hoping, if this works, that I can discover the real way to disassemble this so that people in the future will have a chance to disassemble theirs without going to such extreme measures. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to go back to cutting through what's left of the metal here, and then hopefully it doesn't just fall off, and I'll save the moment where we can all just see if this comes off and what goes on together. So in a moment for you, probably about another 5-10 minutes for me. Very nearly there. You can see the top wants to come off. There's just a little bit left right here. And I figured I would saw the last little bit off on camera. Very close. There it is. Here we go. Those are the electronics that I want. And the electronics don't want to come out. Great. Well, that didn't get me quite what I was looking for. I can push on the bottom here. And those electrics don't want to budge. And if I push from the top, they don't want to go that way. So something is holding those still in. And I don't know what to do at this point. I tried grabbing the plastic here with the channel locks and just seeing if it would rotate at all, and that didn't work. I thought maybe it's a very strong press fit, and I took a piece of wood, stuck it in here, hit it with a mallet. That didn't budge. Took a mallet, hit it at this end, and it didn't budge. So I've been using this very beat up now piece of thin plastic to find seams, and there is something of a seam here, this silver piece. And could that be something? I don't know. So that's gonna have to be epoxied back together at some point. And I know everybody's looking at those 3 screws and saying, undo the 3 screws. It's not 3 screws. Do I just go section by section? Like, do I cut here maybe, or here, and trim it off again and just have several sections? I don't know. Oh well. Cut to a few days later. Here is that socket top that to you, just cut off. To me, it was about a week ago now. And here's the bottom half, which I have applied some more cuts to. The first thing I did... Come on, you. Is I cut that off. And, yeah, this bottom part's still not coming off. So, I sliced sideways. And off it came. And we can see finally how the electronics are held in, which is that this bottom piece here of the active electronics version of the emitter, it screws in right here. I see some gray plasticky stuff in here, and I'm wondering if that's like some kind of Loctite sort of thing. See, there you go, there's a big chunk of it right there. It's gray in color. I don't know if that's putty or is that epoxy. I don't really know, but I'm guessing that these threads are not meant to come undone, so you probably, to unscrew this, will need a pretty significant amount of force. You probably need like a couple of those wrenches that they use to like remove oil filters, right? Something that can grip around the whole thing. You'll need 2 of them so you can torque them. One other thing is you notice there's a little bit of a hole here, and if we take the piece that still has the bottom half screwed in, there's a hole here, and you saw the hole here. Those hold these pins here. So even after you get that bottom piece off, and you got to get that pin out, so it'll sit flush like that, and you have to get that pin out before you can slide the electronics out. How do you do that? To me, it looks like you're just not meant to get in here. So if the electronics break, you're done for, it looks like. Unless you're willing to go to these rather extraordinary lengths. What I'm thinking is, after I look inside at the electronics here, maybe I think about, epoxying the whole thing back together. so it sort of is functional again. Why not? The the hilt was so just beaten up as it is that, you know, this going this far, this little step further of, you know, cutting it up and epoxying it back together, big deal. But once I epoxy it back together, if the electronics go bad in this again, well, there is no way I'm getting back in there. So I better record everything I do while I have it open, and that is the plan. Let's take a look inside the electronics of the active emitter for a Leia Legacy lightsaber. The first thing I want to do then is get the screws out. It looks like there are 2 Phillips head screws. All right, now this is the first time I am going in to look at the electronics here. Let's have a quick reminder. My assumption is that it's a broken ground pin, so let's find out. Here we go. Okay. That comes out good. There we go. And I saw it. Did you see it? My initial assessment is absolutely correct. There it is. A broken ground wire. Wow, that wire is really stiff too. And I don't know if this is going to come across. If you can see right there, all 3 wires are badly squished. I mean, this is something I see in other lightsabers. These wires just get crimped on something, and it's a matter of time before these wires break. Yeah, so you can see the wires come in from the top, and then they're soldered on the underside. And that means I'm going to have to unscrew this, which means there are pogo pins I'm going to have to worry about as I'm taking this apart. And I'm going to do the same for the top as well. You've maybe seen this before when I took apart a Savvy's workshop hilt that had a similar problem. So I'm going to go find some supplies and maybe start tearing this thing down. I'm going to be redoing all these wires anyway, so I'm just going to cut those off so I can put the spring in a little case I have off to the side here so I can collect all the components. And I'll take this piece off first, the part that interfaces with the base of the hilt, those 3 pins there. Here we go. That's the PCB removed. Now you can see the springs and the pogo pins. So now I'm going to take this top half off. Now those 3 screws that I didn't want to take apart before, or remove, I will do so now. Okay. There is our top section and our bottom section. Now I need to remove the wires, or what's left of them, get some new wire, solder them in place. Then I don't know. The wires have been replaced. I hopefully have everything wired back up the way it's supposed to. Alright, so the electronics are back together, and I think it'll be okay. We'll find out. But now I want to test that this is going to work, so I'm just going to slip that in there like so. And I want to make sure I line this up correctly. And the hilt recognizes, oops, come on. The hilt recognizes that there is a blade attached. Look at that. I have a working Leia Legacy lightsaber hilt. But obviously, it's not very viable right now because, of course, I need to reattach all the bits that I cut apart. You know, like this stuff needs to sort of go back in here somehow. My plan is to glue them together with an epoxy. I just want to get the whole thing back together and have a working Leia hilt once again. That's the goal. For me, that's another 2-3 days away before I'm going to be able to do that. But for you, it'd probably be in a few seconds. Well, here it is. I have epoxied all the pieces that I cut back together. It looks rough in places. These seams aren't too visible, but where I cut here and here, you can clearly see. But you know what? It doesn't look too bad. What I used is this stuff, this JB Weld steel stick, which one of the things it's used for is in plumbing, and it's steel reinforced, it says, and that you can grind it and drill it once it sets, and it says all sorts of promising things here, so that's why I went for it. It's a putty. You cut a little piece off the end of it, you mush it up in your fingers. You should wear gloves. It tells you wear gloves when you're doing this. Mush it up in your fingers, and then it's for the next few minutes. It's like a Play-Doh, and you just set it and then let it set, and after an hour it should be cured. So what I did is I would mix it up, roll it into like a long thin thing, and then sort of set it around like I was making a gasket or something. Set it around the one end here, push the two together. I used the inner plastic sleeves to sort of make sure everything was lined up. I used a tool to scrape out the excess, and it's holding together pretty well. I had a goal in mind of reassembling these pieces individually so I could screw this on and off again if I ever needed to get back in. But what I found is first you have to understand, when I made these cuts, I took like a 0.5 millimeter worth of material out from each side here. So when I put it back together, I can't squeeze them back together. I need to make sure that there's a gap there to take up whatever space I removed, the material that I removed. And getting this piece here to fit to work was fine, but this piece here, which is all threads on the inside, and I really didn't want to gunk up the threads. I made a couple attempts at putting this together without trying to preserve the threads. It didn't work. It kept falling apart. So what I wound up doing is I put some putty in there and put it into the threads on the top half here. And that's stuck on there. That's never coming off again. Well, unless you start breaking apart the epoxy. But I had to do that because I needed the bottom threads that are on the inside here to remain exposed and clean so that I could screw this on. And indeed, oops, there we go. It does screw on. And a couple other things. The alignment isn't perfect. This hole here should actually be over here, so it's off a little bit. These cuts here should line up with these cuts here. They don't. So the alignment's a little off, but to be honest, because this thing is missing to begin with, you'll never notice that it's out of alignment a little bit, and that this cut doesn't line up with this cut. You're not going to notice that. Well, you'll notice it, but you're not going to know that they're supposed to line up unless I tell you that. So I think I got away with that a little bit. Another thing I think I discovered while trying to put this back together is that the top half of the socket here, the plastic sleeve, is captured by in this section up here, and it can't come out from the bottom. It has to come out from the top. So I think that maybe the first 2 or so, or maybe 3 of these rings, I believe, are screwed in place similar to how the bottom is, and that you would have to unscrew the top somehow. Again, this makes me think that this was never meant to be removed so that you could service in any way the electronics inside here, even at the factory. I think you're stuck with, once this is assembled, that's it, and if it breaks, you either have to cut this thing apart like I did, or you have to buy a replacement. Anyways, enough of all the talking. Let's see it in action. So I believe it should go in this way. There we go. A moment of truth. And it ignites just fine. Look at that. All things considered, it turned out okay. Some of these cracks I could probably go back in with a little bit more putty just to fill them in a little bit more. The paint keeps coming off, and it feels like the paint is just destined to be completely removed at some point, but for now, it just has this sort of beaten, weathered look that I think is okay. I mean, for what it is. It's a functional hilt. And that's really what I was going for to begin with, just because I don't have a Leia hilt, and so now I do, and my main interest is in the electronics, so I've got the electronics and they're working, so I'm good with what I've got here. One other thing to point out, I noticed a date of 2117 on one of these PCBs that are in here, which means that the PCB would have been manufactured the 17th week of 2021. So I'm guessing June to December of 2021 if you were at Disneyland or downtown Disney in California, and you were looking at a Leia hilt, and the cast member gave you a hilt to try out to see if you liked it. This may very well be that hilt. And it's still around, and it still works.